The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs, we don't see
still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Zero Squared is the Zero Books podcast. This episode of Zero Books is a conversation with Alfie Bown. Alfie is the author of the Zero Books title Enjoying It, Candy Crush and Capitalism, and he recently penned an essay for the Paris Review entitled The Screen of Enamoration, Love in the Age of Google. In this episode, we discuss Tinder, AI, augmented reality, and robot love. It's Wednesday, January 10th, 2018, and I'm Douglas Lane, the publisher of Zero Books and the host of this podcast. We've moved the Inside Zero Books podcast from the Zero Books blog to Patreon. This will make it easier for members to get the podcast on their podcatchers. It also means that we'll be repeating the first year of Inside Zero Books periodically on our Patreon account. So if you missed Inside Zero Books the first time, or if you just want to hear the old episodes again, they'll be available. In fact, I'll be posting an old episode right after I release this podcast. The next rerun will be from November of 2016. It's entitled Inside Zero Books, number 11, Moral Panics, and it features a conversation with Ashley Frawley, who is a reader here at Zero Books. You can also listen to the Inside Zero Books podcast every Saturday or Sunday as they come out. The next one will probably feature a conversation with KMO of the C-Realm podcast, although I haven't quite landed on that yet. If you haven't already, you might pick up Anselm Jepes. I'm always pronouncing his last name differently. It's the French. My apologies. Anyway, the book The Writing on the Wall is excellent. Also, Stuart Walton's Neglected or Misunderstood, introducing Theodore Adorno, is out there and worth reading. Reading Angela Nagle's Kill All Normies is a great way to bring in the new year. And the anthology Punk is Dead is another terrific title from Zero Books. The music you're listening to right now is a cover of Kraftwerk's Robots, or We Are the Robots, or yeah, I think that's what it's called. Anyhow, it's a cover of that. But in just a moment, you'll be listening to Alfie Bown and I discuss robot love. So Alfie Bown is a co-editor of the Hong Kong Review of Books, the author of The PlayStation Dream World, and, of course, Enjoying It, Candy Crush and Capitalism from Zero Books, which is his masterpiece. He is also the author behind a piece that was published in the Paris Review back in September entitled The Screen of Enamoration, Love in the Age of Google. Alfie Bown, welcome back to the Zero Squared book podcast.
How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm glad to talk to you again. It's been a little while.
Yeah, good to be back on.
Yeah. So you've had a book come out in the meantime from another press, The PlayStation Dream World. And I thought before we talked about your piece in the Paris Review, you could tell people about that and like who published that and when did that come out? And
right. Yeah, that's just come out last month with Polity Press. It's in a really great series. I recommend the whole series rather than just my book. It's got quite a few Zero writers are in the little series, including Graham Harman and Dominic Petman. It's a small new series called Theory Redux, which is like run by Laurent de Sutter, who's a kind of Belgian philosopher, and he's a great guy, and he's kind of put together this really interesting little series. The other books coming out right now recently is Nick Cernicek's Platform Capitalism, and Helen Hester's Xenofeminism, which I think are both brilliant, and Laurent de Sauteur's own book, which is called Narco-Capitalism. And then there's mine, which is The PlayStation Dream World. And so this is quite a small series. I think so far it's just like 8 books, and they're all these very small, like 25,000 words, like maybe 100-page little books.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really great. So it's just a small book that I wrote about video games, but about contemporary social life, and how, I mean, my basic argument there has been that just as Hollywood cinema, completely changed social life in the sort of 60s and 70s, and over the last 20 years, video games have been playing a kind of similar role. So it's really not a book for gamers. It's a kind of philosophy which emerges from video games, and which kind of takes as a starting point the idea that video games are kind of transformative of social life, and trying to sort of philosophize really about the ways in which we can see video gaming as representative of a kind of shift in the kind of trajectory of capitalism. So I think it's the kind of thing your readers would probably be interested to check out.
Yeah, and your piece in the Paris Review follows along a similar trajectory, although not about video games per se, but about augmented reality and also just the internet and sites like OkCupid. And it's called The Screen of Enamoration, Love in the Age of Google.
It does really emerge from this recent book, PlayStation Dream World, but also from the first book I did, which was, as you know, is called Enjoying It, Candy, Crush and Capitalism, which is with you guys at Zero.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that first book on mobile phones, and then the second one on video games. And I want to do my next project, which is just kind of at the early stages now, will be about technology and love, which I hope we can talk about a bit more later. But all things which connect love and technology. I'm interested in online dating, sex robots, virtual girlfriends, VR, AI, all sorts of kinds of things. I'd like to. So this is the kind of. I think that would be. So I've gone from thinking of mobile phones to video games. I had to go into the next project thinking about what is the relationship between love and technology in kind of the world that we're in at the moment. And I wanted to introduce that as in this kind of article for the Paris Review, which it's only a short little piece, but I was very happy to have the chance to write it. And it's basically about how what is the relationship between love, technology, and politics. I mean, for example, one of the pieces of it's really probably my first piece of genuine what do you call it? Genuine research I've ever done in my life was just working out how to use this kind of Python to pull data, pulling data from Google Scholar, which shows that basically trying to show that as the topic, as academia becomes more interested in politics, it becomes less interested in love. And looking at the patterns of number of times love and politics have been mentioned by academic articles via, say, Google Scholar as an example. And to try and actually, so I did some actual empirical research, probably for the first time in my life, and wanted to start analysing from that, philosophically, why is it that, as politics becomes takes the center stage of our kind of Facebook feeds, love recedes into the background, and vice versa. What is that kind of separates love and politics? Whereas Roland Barthes, the kind of neglected French theorist, or someone I think is a neglected French theorist, in a world where we're seeing loads of kind of reactivations and revivals of Deleuze, Foucault, even if they're critical, Derrida, even, Roland Barthes wrote this brilliant text about how love is always political and implicated within the political in very interesting ways. So I just wanted to kind of use this particular moment where we're all focused on politics, and we can see that love again has receded into the background as a topic, and look at this contemporary moment again through the arguments of Roland Barthes, which I think could be important in kind of analysing the relationship between love and politics.
So what made you suspect that love would have receded because politics was so dominant, and when do you think that happened? So what made you notice this connection, and when did it start to happen that you noticed it?
I mean, I think that there's long been a kind of separation between love and politics. I would say probably since the 60s and 70s. I mean, you can think of obvious examples of the hippie movements, which kind of united love with kind of countercultural politics. And I'd say that since then, there's been a drifting away from that. I mean, there's a great 2003 movie called Dreamers by director Bernardo Bertolucci, and it's a romance set in the 1968 French riots, and it encapsulates exactly this: the fact that there's Molotov cocktails going off in the streets outside, but inside the bourgeois apartments, love continues uninhibited by the political, and that is the argument made by Alain Badiou in his book from 2012, which is called In Praise of Love. Badiou kind of maintained that love was separate from the political, and that may be even what was radical about love for Badiou. So I think I wanted to use Roland Barthes as a counterpoint to that one. That I think that love is inherently connected to politics, as Roland Barthes did, and that what we can actually see is that technology is encouraging us to the sort of double thing that the relationship between technology and politics is such that we're encouraged to see love as apolitical and not implicated in political patterns. At the same time, we've got another pattern, which is an increasing organization of love, which is controlled by political power and political corporations. So it's in the interests of these huge Silicon Valley techno giants who control all the means through which we fall in love. It's in the interests of them that we should think of love as separate from politics. And if we can insist that love is political, we can actually start to maybe make visible the ways in which our private lives, our friendships, and our relationships are being transformed in the service of what Nick Cernacek calls platform capitalism. Which is a kind of increasingly, in a nutshell, it's a capitalism where increasingly few shareholders own increasingly large parts of the platform. So, in the case of love, there are some concrete examples of that. For example, the company AIC, they own OkCupid, they own Match.com, they own Tinder, they own other more strange niche dating sites like Christian Harmony and other things like that. And you can see that if something like Grindr, which for a long time was a kind of subversive, that was the only major dating site, or the gay hookup site, Grindr was the only major one, which was a startup company owned by its own owners, but now that's been bought out by the huge gaming corporation in Beijing, Kunlun Tech. So what you're seeing is a pattern by which all the platforms in which we fall in love are being owned by a smaller group of individual, owners.
Yeah, you hear about on Facebook this idea that we all are living in our demographic bubbles, and that we're only hearing what the corporation wants us to hear, or what Facebook thinks we should hear based on our demographics. And so it's easy to imagine that with these websites that are designed to help us in love, dating sites and hookup sites, that we might suffer a similar fate where we're living inside of a certain kind of love bubble. We're only going to be able to connect or have relationships with certain kinds of people that the corporations think we should or might successfully hook up with.
Yeah, I mean, and let me answer your question more directly, because you asked what made me think that this might be right now of contemporary validity. I mean, actually, it's things that you'd be probably really interested in and many of your discussions lately on the podcast have been related to things like this. I mean, I started to notice these articles emerging. There's some famous alt-right guy called, I think his name's Soren Kirk. His name's Emil Kierkegaard. No, it's a Danish guy, Emil Kierkegaard, and he is that's right, Emil Kierkegaard. He's done data mining in OkCupid to basically prove white supremacy, and then there's other articles emerging about how Tinder Gold, particularly the Rasheen Kibbard's Guardian article about Tinder Gold, as you show that it takes us into this kind of robot style dating, which is political. So you're kind of seeing various ways in which love is being kind of reconnected with politics, and some of those are quite scary. You've got what we were just talking about, which is this kind of corporate organization of desire, which happens through this kind of dominance of the love market and regulation of it, and then on top of that, you've got these kind of scary niche examples like the far right guys who are data mining OkCupid to prove they're trying to prove that white people should date white people, and other people should stick in their races, this kind of stuff.
Oh, so you're saying, like, if you look at the OkCupid data, more successful relationships come out of relationships between white people or between the same races, and we should stick to our own, and based on just the success rate for these dates, basically.
Exactly. And again, if you take the position that love is not political, then that could be very dangerous. So it seems to me very important to go back to this argument of Roland Barthes and prove that absolutely love must be seen as political, and it's being used in political ways to serve. I've just mentioned two groups. It's being used to serve the far right, and it's being used to serve the corporate center. So that's why I'm looking at it from a left-wing perspective, that this is something that the progressive left has also got to confront and think about. If the corporations are using love to assert their political agenda, and the far right are doing the same, and we're all just sitting here thinking that love is apolitical, we're gonna get overtaken.
Yeah, this is an argument. Yeah, I remember encountering an article or an essay which showed that, and when you look at the way that people like or click profiles on Tinder, you'll find that certain races don't do as well. Like black women don't do as well; they don't get clicked as often. Asian men don't do as well; they don't get clicked as often. And there was an article written about maybe racism in the online dating scene that came out of just doing empirical research on the data on clicks. And people's response to it would be, well, the heart likes what it likes. People, you can't make love politically correct, that kind of thing. And what you're saying is it's not as simple as that, and it's not only a matter of individual proclivities, but also in these networks of relations, there's probably many things that are leading into, why you click on this or why you click on that.
Yeah, that's absolutely where I'm coming from with it. And that the longer we go on making those arguments, which are like, well, the heart wants what the heart wants, the more that we will be, the longer we will go on being blind to the fact that other stakeholders and other players in the kind of political and technological space are thinking of it quite differently, are thinking of how exactly they can manipulate that space to their own advantage, and how it's not just a case of the heart wants what the heart wants. So yeah, no, that's a kind of a good way of putting it. Yeah, I mean, so it comes from kind of these several very important books on love and technology, which are, this is a topic in itself. I think I just mentioned like Badiou's book, which I think is 2012, like In Praise of Love, it's called. There's a great book by Dominic Petman called Of Love and Other Technologies, which I think is like a few years earlier than that. And then there's the 2015 book by Srečko Horvat, which is called The Radicality of Love. So you can see that philosophy is paying attention to love as a political topic, and I think what's just needed is to recognize the important role of technology in that relationship.
Now, when you're talking about the role of technology, it's easy to kind of bring to mind some paranoid ideas about, I don't know, the Matrix, or living inside of a rat maze-like system where your choices aren't as free as you think. And you're, I think it's the Deleuzian concept of the society of the control seems to map on pretty well to this new networked digital reality that we're all sort of living in, especially I feel like I live in. On the one hand, I'm just going to bring up my novel. It's one of the things I told you I was going to talk about. So on the one hand, there's this fear about that. But in my upcoming novel, Batch Revolution, I tried to work out what the world would be like if we really did live in that kind of society of control. One where, in the novel, an AI used Pokemon Go and other augmented reality video games to orchestrate social life. And my theory was that this would actually represent a break from capitalism, which is a system wherein social life is organized around commodity production and the exchange of commodities on the market. And a lot of critiques of capitalist society are critiques of capitalism without capitalism. They focus on the kind of supposedly free choices we make in the market, the kind of supposedly free choices we make in our personal lives, and worry about how free those choices are without examining the economic and social systems that make those choices possible. And what I'd done by putting an AI in charge of orchestrating social life is I'd replaced capitalism with the AI. I thought of another system, another orchestrating principle to do the work that capitalism is doing now. Guy Debord and his idea of the society of the spectacle was another kind of touchstone for me, because I thought, what if what he says about capitalism was actually true? In other words, rather than commodities, we now lived based on our desire for images. So I guess I'm bringing this up only to ask you, is there a more liberatory aspect to this idea of society that really is organized and orchestrated by networks of digital information rather than, work and money and all of that?
I mean, look, I think this is just a fascinating question. I mean, and I've read some of your book. You send that to me. And I've got a little preview of that, and I'm really enjoying it. So if people are listening, they should pre-order your book. I'm really enjoying it, and of course, as you probably may know, I also started this project by thinking of Pokemon Go, and there's a chapter on Pokemon Go in my PlayStation book, the new book, the PlayStation Dream World, and it is actually very much the kind of philosophical counterpart of what you've done in a kind of fictional way in Bash Revolution, because I'm also definitely believe that in the most kind of matrixy kind of way that Pokemon Go does turn us into, or does indicate another pattern, a wider pattern by which we are turned into these kind of lemmings orchestrated by a computer program. And I think there are various ways in which that's true, and I've mainly written about it in an article in Raw magazine. If listeners think I sound like I'm talking absolutely out of my arse, then maybe that they could check that out and see if they still really disagree. I tried to kind of show that what you see in Pokemon Go is visible in various other ways in which we relate to our smartphones, including the way we look for a Pikachu can be comparatively similar to the way we look for a lover on Tinder or Grindr, and comparatively similar to the way we look like for a bowl of noodles or a burger. So the way we're moving around our city looking for electronic objects, which are also sometimes real objects, like some food or someone to have sex with or someone to fall in love with, or a Pikachu or a Clefairy or whatever. There are actually visible patterns between those ways in which we relate to those different kinds of objects, and that again is related to what we can talk about in terms of platform capitalism, because a small group of shareholders, it's not surprising that gaming companies are buying dating sites, because there's a definite connection both in the back system and in the user-facing side, in the way that we're encouraged to relate to objects in games and objects out of games, and so that was the kind of jumping off point of my book on video games, to think about that through Pokemon Go. And in that discussion, Debord was also the kind of key figure for me. I've kind of tried to argue that what Debord called the psychogeographical contours of the city, which for him were primarily controlled by architecture. 30 years later or 40 years later, those things are now primarily controlled by basically the mobile phone.
50 years later, really.
50 years.
Yeah, you wrote that in 67.
Yes, 50 years. Yeah, 67. Yeah,
yes.
okay.
Yeah.
50 years on, architecture is no longer the primary force in constructing the psychogeographical contours of the city. It's the mobile phone. And I'm now working on a comparative idea to write a long article comparing 3 cities in China with 3 cities in the West. So it'll be New York, London, and somewhere else, with Hong Kong, Shanghai, and Hangzhou, and looking at how you can take a Debordian approach to look at the different way in which these cities are organized by these kind of new kind of programs. I've just been to. I just got taken on like a VIP tour of Alibaba's headquarters in Hangzhou. It was one of the most bizarre experiences of my life. Like, there's like a drone car where like it drives you around with a drone following you, and the drone like knows if you're hungry. and and anticipates your desires, and it learns your patterns of movement and your patterns of behavior, and it makes recommendations and takes you on routes which it believes would fulfill your desires, even though you haven't necessarily realized you had those desires yet. So in many ways I do think we're actually living in the kind of matrix type dystopia that people joke about. And so now to come to your real question about how does that relate to capitalism, you're saying that you thought of that as a way in which capitalism is a break from capitalism. Now, I don't see it in that way myself. Like if you think about your own phrase, commodity production, even with that, for Marx and Engels, you've got a move from simple commodity production to what some people call merchant capitalism, and then to what could be referred to as capitalist production, maybe. And I think that what we're in now is, well, that's why I've already twice used this term, and I'm sort of taking from Nick Cernacek, which is platform capitalism, which, I do think it's a break. I do think a big break, a big kind of revolution has happened in the structure of our social life. And I do think it's a break from the way capitalism was, but I think it's a move into another form of capitalism. So it brings you to that, which is platform capitalism, because the ownership of these programs, the AIs, the video games, the dating sites, it's all centralized by a few huge tech, Silicon Valley and equivalent in China, tech companies who control these spaces, and that is platform capitalism in a nutshell. So the important thing to say there, I think, is that it's revolutionary, and it has changed and shifted the structure of capitalism, but it's moved us forward into another form of capitalism.
You're right. Well, I mean, I think this is where you and I might have, a kind of fundamental disagreement about what capitalism is and how it's structured. And I'm sort of more of this orthodox, stodgy type that likes to focus on this productive or the production side and say, like, for instance, you've got these institutions that, like Google, that own a lot of intellectual property and direct how we consume information and rely on the state and property rights to make money. But none of that is fundamentally a break from, what Marx talked about in Capital. It's just a matter of the kind of intellectual property is different, but it still fits within the old framework. But I don't want to go into that, because I could do that over and over again and have that conversation. But what I want to ask you about, though, is how do you? Well, I guess I will press on a little bit. I just want to ask you how you perceive profit being made by these organizations. And when you said in your essay for the Paris Review that Pokemon Go was a kind of testing phase for Google's technologies of social organization, placing it as it did so many objects of desire in urban locations to maximize profit. What did you mean by maximizing profit? How did they maximize profit by placing these objects of desire in urban locations?
I think it can be about maximizing profit, but really I was using that as just to sort of start the conversation about this, I think, because, I think that so, for example, if you put the Pikachu next to McDonald's, then McDonald's are going to make money, and McDonald's have done a deal with Google where they get that, you get a Pikachu in your Happy Meal for that month or whatever, and it's all this kind of thing where of course you're making incremental changes to people's movements in the city in order to make incremental changes to the amount of profit made by a group of shareholders who are going to benefit from these people's movement. But that said, I don't think it's only about money, or maybe it's becoming less about profit. In a way, I mean, it's a very complicated question because you obviously, and it relates to all kinds of other things, all other relationships between these kind of tech giants and things like the universal basic income and things like that, which is a kind of way of placating people who would otherwise be pissed off with them. how all these kind of tech giants support something like the UBI, and so they're not just interested in generating profit. So for me to use that phrase, maximize profit, is maybe actually wrong, because it's not their primary interest. I think their primary interest is, the profit is being generated anyway. And it can be a quick question of kind of both keeping people busy and keeping people from revolting, as well as maximizing their own profits. I think the important thing to say in relation to, I get what you're saying, is that what I'm interested in about what you're saying is that you believe that if an AI was to orchestrate social life, that would be a break from capitalism. Can you say why that is, so that I can understand your question more?
Sure. I think if AI was orchestrating not only what we consumed, but also how we reproduce the world. In other words, rather than people going to work in order to be producing commodities and being exploited through their abstract labor, and then being paid a wage for their labor power, et cetera, et cetera. If instead of that, the act of play, directed play through, say, a series of augmented reality games, was itself productive of the food people need to eat, the microchips that need to be produced in order to expand the virtual world. If that happened, then we would no longer be producing for profit. We wouldn't be producing to create a surplus of abstract value. We would be producing simply to create objects for use, only half the time the objects would be virtual, or you'd be constructing the systems you needed to play the other games you wanted to play, rather than constructing commodities for exchange in a market. It would be a break from capitalism as I understand it.
It's not what you're trying to do is imagine what that would look like, and I think it's not. Although it's difficult to imagine, it's not a million miles away from something that could happen. But the question is then, the problem for me is that someone's going to own these things. Just think of an example, give two quick examples, two AI examples, like Sophia the robot, who recently got the citizenship in Saudi Arabia, and she's actually born in Hong Kong, just down the road from me, which is kind of weird. No, she doesn't live here now. She's a Hong Kong export. She lived in the same area as me. We literally basically live in the same street. Or she was born here. And the other example I was going to give is the AI, which is making legal decisions in order to take out the role of emotion in making a fair legal judgment. Now, those are two examples of something where the AI has taken over from a traditional method of a traditional structure, but they're both kind of questionable. And because they still have an owner. Sophia is famous because she's the first to get a passport. She's just been given citizenship in Saudi Arabia, or whatever, and that's why she's kind of hit the news. And I really think this is something very dangerous about the way we relate to robots. It's something I want to explore more in future work. Is that we're increasingly encouraged to empathize with robots and look at them as people. That's why we're building them with faces, like why AIs have a face, and the reason why we do that is so that we can move some legal power from the traditional people who have it to the robot AI. So if Sophia gets citizenship, which comes with certain rights, it means that the power is transferred from, we're just giving rights to something which is owned by a huge corporation, right? So the more robots are given rights, there's a big ethical issue of robot rights. I'm sure you've seen all the kind of articles about it at the moment, but it seems to be people don't seem to consider the point that there's a very simple point that the more you're handing rights to these AIs and these robots, is the more you're handing rights to the huge tech companies which control them, because these robots are not developing innocently of political structures and innocently of because it's the natural way in which technology is developed. They're developing it to play certain functions and do certain jobs because they've been designed to do those jobs by people with particular interests at heart. So if you hand a passport to Sophia, you're handing power to, since the passport comes with rights, you're handing rights to a particular political corporation which has a particular agenda. Secondly, you're removing responsibility from that corporation who created them. So if robots have rights, or you're doing two things. You think you're handing rights to a lovely human-looking android, but you're actually handing them to the corporation who built and control it. And secondly, you're also allowing that corporation to take a different legal status when it comes to their responsibility. So the robot could be responsible instead of the corporation. So until you actually do arrive in the kind of impossible future where robots are really making decisions for themselves, which is very far from being the case at the moment, those processes of handing rights to things like AI is very, very dangerous for those reasons.
Okay, I don't disagree with you about AI in the world right now. I can definitely see how you could set up a computer program with legal rights and legal responsibilities, who would then basically, because of the programming that the corporation created, make all sorts of decisions, say violating human rights law legislation, or violating labor laws, or polluting the environment. And then, rather than the corporation being held responsible, you just lock up the AI for however many years, or shut it off, or and then just build another one to do similar things. I mean, I can see that happening. The one thing I'll say is, in my imagination, in my little science fiction novel, the AI was truly sentient, and it created a situation in which it was able to replace not only a corporation, but the very structuring idea and organization of our society. It replaced capitalism with itself. And one thing it's not actually a completely utopian novel, because the main character is struggling to stay outside of its grip. And because, whatever we think of human agency and free will sort of disappears once you start playing these games. It can control your nervous system even, and augment your abilities and also direct your desires.
Right. I mean, this point about direct your desires, though, that I do really like about that idea, and that is something I've really been working on. That's what this Roland Barthes article is about too. Is that is something we are seeing now. Jean-Francois Lyotard referred to the desire evolution. Kind of revolution in desire, and I think that we're seeing that now through technology and through AI. And you can sort of see that in many different ways.
You write in your essay that that the plutocrats sort of are directing our desires and creating. I mean, in my novel, the AI can direct your desires simply by sending electrical impulses through sound waves to your brain. But how does an image that say Facebook creates, or some other corporation creates, become an object of desire? And I'll just ask that.
But isn't what you just described, the AI can simply send something straight to your brain, and then you go out and you're immediately desiring it? Isn't that exactly the same thing as when a Pikachu pops up on your mobile phone screen? You have no choice but to desire it and go out in search of that object which has appeared through your phone.
I don't know. I felt like I had a choice. I mean, when my kids were playing Pokemon Go, it didn't take me but 10 minutes to get bored of the whole thing.
Currently, not every object works on every person.
Right.
But but you can see that the possibilities that it's already happening in some ways.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess they do it through demographic studies and sort of already knowing what your proclivities are through study and information analysis.
Yeah, and look, I mean, this was the main thing about the essay, that what Roland Barthes argued was that the quirkiest little quote is, the first thing we love is a screen, is a scene. Sorry, like a dramatical scene. The first thing we love is a scene. And he spoke about the scene of enamoration. Enamoration means becoming enamored, falling in love. So that's why I called the essay The Screen of Enamoration, because, I'm following this idea so this is a radical argument by Roland Barthes, in my opinion, that the first thing you love is a scene. It means you don't fall in love with the object You don't fall in love because of the object. You fall in love because of the scene, which has been carefully prepared for you to fall in love at a particular moment, right? Okay, a scene in a play that you're watching, it's been orchestrated with the object placed in such a way as the subject will fall in love with it because of the scene, not because of the object itself. Stupidly obvious answer, it would be like the way they organize Nike trainers in a shop window. It's not that you actually always wanted that trainer, but that the scene has been prepared in such a way as to set desire on its course.
I'm going to ask you a question that's off script, and this is just how old is you have a daughter, right?
Nearly two.
Yeah,
nearly
two. So she's still pretty young, but I have 4 kids, and I remember, and especially with my oldest child, my first, teaching him to pay attention to television. Not like on purpose, not like sitting him down to do this, but also taking him to movies and teaching him to pay attention to the movie screen. We just talked about this today. He's home from university for the winter break. We're talking about the first movie he saw was The Wizard of Oz and how he responded to it. But before he could ever even sit through The Wizard of Oz, he had to be sort of trained in how to situate himself in a movie theater and where to pay attention and what a story was when it was acted out like this. And there's a lot that goes into just getting you to the point where you can be scared of the Wicked Witch on screen or side with Dorothy. And none of that's natural. But so the first time, I think what you're saying is like the first time you fall in love is only after massive training. It's only after, you've really been brought into the world and fit into the ideology that your parents have set up for you, maybe. Or
Right. And that would relate very nicely to what we talked about towards the beginning of our chat about, the alt-right nonsense about dating sites and the heart wants what the heart wants. It's a counter argument to that. So yeah, absolutely. And I'm seeing the same thing that you described with my daughter. I mean, already she, it's not that you have to learn. You can see them learn to want something, and you're learning to desire. I would think that would be an interesting way of phrasing it. You have to learn to desire, and to admit that would be to counter a lot of assumptions that we have about desire in a general discourse, at the very least, as well as many theories of desire from the academia right through to just general life. So yeah, I mean, that was my kind of point, to take that idea and to apply it to screens rather than scenes, which are really the same thing anyway, and that we to explore how we're living in a world where it's the structure, not the object, which is important. And that's why I'm really attracted. This is actually not something that Nick Turnacek says, but it's why I'm really attracted to his concept of platform capitalism, because I like this idea that it's not the objects and the desires themselves, but the scenes or screens through which those desires play out and are enacted. In other words, it's the platforms which are more important than the objects which we access through those platforms. So that's like Facebook is more important than the people using it. But I don't totally agree with it, but I think it's an interesting way of looking at it, and it reveals certain truths about the kind of society we now live in, that an increasingly small number of power holders, of platform owners, of platform controllers are responsible for the ways in which we relate to each other and the ways in which we relate to objects. In other words, the way we desire itself. So, if we acknowledge that we have to be trained to fall in love, the scene has to be perfectly set for us to desire, to experience desire. We've got to be scared by the fact that fewer and fewer people, fewer and fewer corporations are in charge of setting those scenes than ever before.
I totally agree with you about the importance of the scene or the context or the system of socialization. You can say it a bunch of different ways. Or the screen is more important than any particular object in it, that you can't even have an object at all until you have set the scene for it, basically. Or until you have a screen for it. There is no object until there is a screen. I think that's all very true. But what I have come to decide, and this is something I'm constantly testing, so I don't want to be dogmatic about it, but is that
capitalism, as described in Capital Volume 1, is that screen. That is the screen that has to be set for most of the world as we know it to ever even appear. And to say that we're in platform capitalism, to me, misses the point that capitalism is the platform. It is the screen. It is the scene.
Okay, that's a good point, and I agree with that too. Can I agree with both? It depends on the context. I think that can be important to realize, and that's why I'm stressing as well. That's why platform capitalism is capitalism. I mean, it's not. Yeah, because there's a consistent thing going on from we mentioned earlier, like you can change from what people used to call merchant capitalism to contemporary capitalism. You've also got capitalism, what phrases like capitalism 2.0, all of those things retain the sense that you're saying that, yes, capitalism is the screen. It's the thing which already is there for us even to start thinking in the way in which so that's correct what you're saying. And there's a reason to oppose capitalism and imagine, like in your novel, how you would organize otherwise without it. But there's also important shifts which happen, which can't be ignored.
Right.
And I definitely think I don't think we're even in the midst of one now, or that one's about to happen. Unlike those who think the apocalypse is coming or whatever, right. I think that it's already happened. We're at the start of a new a new form of capitalism, which is in its relatively early years at the moment, and that whilst it still has those problems which run throughout the history of capitalism, as you've pointed out, there's still important need to notice when something changes within that, especially when it's significant as
how do we take control of our love life, Alfie? What do we do to take control of these screens and decide? I mean, because what I don't want to see happen is some Maoist committee deciding, okay, we're going to program OkCupid so that nobody of the same race can ever fall in love, and we're only going to match up. Every black man has to marry a Korean, and every Italian has to. We're gonna set up our new, better system of control. I do want to hold on to this sort of a little bit of this idea. The heart wants what it wants, and there's some freedom for the individual. How do we grab hold of the screen without losing ourselves in the process?
Well, my view there is that technology is not the evil. I mean, obviously, most of what I've said has been like, oh, look, technology is organizing and controlling our love life in the most horrible ways. And I've been looking through all sorts of examples of that. But I don't think that's the only possible relationship between love and technology. I actually don't think that technology is the evil here. It's more like it's opportunity. I think that there's great opportunity for love to transform radically, and for subjectivity and desire to change in interesting, positive ways out of some of the older models. So there's no nostalgia here for a love that's free of control. Instead, I think that it's a shame that the technologies we're seeing emerge do nothing to radically transform love into a better political force. For example, something like, I'm now working on a range of things like sex robots. The icon. I don't know if you've seen this. The icon, the e-condom that syncs with your smartphone.
No.
So you put it on and continue to have sex as you would with your wife, and then it records everything, immediately syncs with your smartphone, gives you statistics, advice.
Holy moly, really?
Yeah, and then
I hope that she doesn't have one of these. I don't want to know how I'm rating at the end of this process.
No, it's Well, that's the thing. It falsely presents itself as somehow. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's all feminist, because it's not. But it presents itself as making the man a better lover to help him to pleasure the woman. But the hidden feature of it, or the most striking feature of it, is that it's a kind of bro. It's a very masculine product, actually. It's a very compare your sexual prowess with
other men in your area.
Yes, very
what's
homosocial, actually.
right. We could instead of talking on Skype, we could just compare
the previous night's lovemaking, and you could say, 20 minutes longer than you old man.
Yeah, at least it would take out it would maybe like take out all the bullshit. Like men would no longer talk because it would just be so clear anyway. There's no I wonder what. I was just going to mention Terry Tapp, who if he. And
Tapp,
his sexual
man, I wouldn't want to
put one of these on
Terry
Terry
Tapp on one of these apps because he's a Lothario. He I'm sure he would outperform both of us.
That's what I was thinking. But in any case, let me go. I do think it's an important item, and other things like VR. I've got a VR girlfriend. It's so. I mean, and you just kind of stroke her hair and things, and I've also got an AI girlfriend on my mobile phone, Replica. Some of your listeners will know what that is. Replica. It's an AI chatbot which learns to give you what you want from a relationship or friendship, and it's got a fascinating story because the woman who made Replica, she lost her best friend and created Replica to replace him. So these things then, virtual girlfriends on the VR headset, the sex robots, the Replica AI, and the icon, they all examples of technology which is like gradually transforming our sex lives, but it's doing so in a very kind of narcissistic and I think patriarchal and problematic way. It's only giving us a kind of narcissism. It reminded me of a great argument from Jacques Derrida, who I normally hate, in a book called The Politics of Friendship. He argues that friendship has two functions, right? One is to narcissistically affirm the subject, and the second is to kind of challenge that subject and force them on in new ways. And I think that technology and friendships with robots has great potential to have that second category where it forces us into new social relationships with each other with these robots. We become what Donna Haraway calls cyborgs in a kind of positive political way, where our engagement with the robot especially as an object of love could be potentially radical and transformative in positive ways, but we're only seeing the first of those things identified by Derrida. We're only seeing technology designed to turn friendships and relationships into narcissistic affirmation, not kind of political challenges to us. So that I'm saying that the pattern is negative that's happening now between technology and love, but we need to change that direction
Have you seen the movie Her?
Yeah, it's a great example it's a great example. I was thinking also of Her and Ex Machina. Have you seen that movie where it's also and then the third example is the AI in the new Blade Runner, which falls in love with the replicant, but only insofar as it provides what the replicant wants, makes the replicant feel better about itself. Those are all quite interesting examples of that, and I think that those three movies they do for the last sort of
What do you think? Compare Her and the AI and Blade Runner. Do you think which one of them is going to be transformative? Because I think Her, at least the story as it was told, aimed at convincing the audience that this man's relationship with an AI ended up being transformative and being the AI was more than he could fathom. Whereas in Blade Runner, there was nobody home on either side.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it fits well into what I was just saying. I think that it's a shame we're not although I preferred Ex Machina as a movie. I guess there's a similar thing in Ex Machina. At the end, it seems like she's the object of his every desire, and then she turns around and destroys him.
Right.
So at least in those movies, they for me envisage a more hopeful future in which AI could be a challenge to the subject.
I'm not with you on X-Men. I would prefer not to have the girlfriend that's the object of my desire turn around and destroy me. I think I prefer her.
Yeah, well, I think
she transcends me rather than just murder me and then go out into the world to wreck.
Yeah. I mean, me too. But I think in Ex Machina, it's a more direct, let's say, conscious, deliberate Lacanian argument on the part of is it who made that film? I can't remember who the director.
I don't remember.
But you know, it's actually trying to say in an abstract way. You if you realize your desires, you will be destroyed. You know, that isn't how desire works. It needs to be unfulfilled and sustained in a more complex way. You know, that's the metaphor being used. You know, if you actually got what you want, you would be totally destroyed. So that's different. That's maybe slightly different. But yeah, I mean, actually, the last chapter of my recent book, the PlayStation Dreamworld one, discusses those movies that you happen to mention. Well, not Blade Runner, but those two, Ex Machina and Her, and you know, try to talk about this issue of building AIs in our image, right? Are they built? Why are they built in the image of humans? And you know, why, or could they not be a more subversive other to engage with in kind of more interesting ways than that? So
it's an interesting challenge for a science fiction writer.